Good evening, everyone. We're going to be learning tonight Maseches Eruvin Daf Chaf Dalet. A very clean blot, all pretty much about one sugya, about the sugya as we refer to as a karpef or a karfef. And this is a space as we've discussed in the past, but now I'll speak about it in more detail. A karpef is a space that typically is not hukaf l'dira. It's a space that is surrounded, and mida oraisa, it is a reshus hayachid. But mida rabbanan, rabbinically speaking, we typically view that space as not hukaf l'dira, and therefore is problematic as it relates to carrying. In fact, this is sometimes a real thorn in the side of building an eruv. Let's say that in a particular area you want to build an eruv, but there's a karpef there. So the karpef ruins everything. And therefore, in order to carry, you'd have to cordon off the karpef in order to make it permissible to carry. So that's the sugya that we're going to learn tonight. And that is, again, the sugya of karpef that starts about 10 lines from the bottom of Chav Gimel Amud Beis. And this will take us to the top of Chav Hey Amud Aleph to the second line there. So let's get started. First, we're on the line, 10 lines from the bottom, Chav Gimel Amud Beis. Karpef Shu Yoser Mid Beis Saim Shehu Kaf Ladira. If you have this karpef, this unused space, but in fact it was hukaf ladira, it was used for a place where people might live. So then says the Gemara, again 9 lines from the bottom, Chav Gimel Amud Beis, says the Gemara, Nizra Rubo, if you plant it like smaller seeds on the ground, like let's say you're going to grow wheat, right? You plant the whole field with wheat. Nizra Rubo, if most of it's planted, Harehu Kigina, then it's like a garden, Ve'aser, and you've ruined it. In other words, you've ruined something that was mutter. This karpef was hukaf ladira. So if it's hukaf ladira, so then it should be mutter to carry because it's hukaf ladira. It was made with an eruv. It was hukaf ladira for people to live. But you ruined it by planting. You ruined it by planting rows and rows of wheat kernels, whatever they may be, of seeds. It says the Gemara, nata. This is a very subtle distinction in language. When we say nizra, is talking about planting small things. Nata is a relation. Is a word that relates to trees. So when you're planting saplings, then things change. Not a rubo, but harehu kechatzer mutter. Then that doesn't ruin the karpef. So when you plant small seeds and small vegetation, that ruins the karpef. You can't carry anymore, even if it was hukaf ladira, but you ruined it when you planted. But here, the karpef, when you've added saplings, you've added baby trees, so then it's treated as a chatzer, not as a gino. It's treated as a chatzer, and that is mutter, says the Gemara. And then we're going to go back now and analyze the case of Nizra Rubo. Again, our case is that we have a karpef, we have a space that is not typically used for living, but in this case, it was hukaf ladira. You did, in fact, cordon off this space for living. Let's say that it's like a part of a forest. People don't live in the forest. You live in the forest, so you built a house there. Good. Now it's hukaf ladira. So that would kind of be the case that we're dealing with here. But all of the free space, you plant little tiny plants there. So then that's what we're going to talk about now. Nizra Rubo, 8 lines from the bottom. Amar Rav Huna, this is version number 1 of how to understand Nizra Rubo. Says the Gemara, Nizra Rubo, if most of the ground in the karpef was planted with small vegetation, Amar Rav Huna Bereder Rabbi Yeshua, Lo Amran Ela Yoser Mi Beis Saim. When do we say that that's going to be problematic? That's only if what you're planting is more than the 5,000 square feet, the Beis Saim that we learned about yesterday. If what you've planted covers more than 5,000 square feet, so then you're done. Then you're not allowed to carry. Aval Beis Saim, up to that amount, up to that threshold amount of 5,000 square feet, of square amos, mutter, that's permissible. Kiman, who is that like? That's like the opinion of Reb Shimon. Says the Gemara, Reb Shimon, the Mishnah writes, Reb Shimon Omer, Echad gagos ve'echad charseros ve'echad karfifos rishus achas ein lekelim sheshavsu b'sochan below lekelim sheshavsu b'socha bayis. When there are things out in the field, even though there's empty space there, so the fact is that it's all combined as one. And then what do? We say that if it's up to Beis Saim plus some empty space, so says the Gemara, that's mutter based on this sheet of Rav Shimon, that the used space and the empty space can combine, and we treat it all as a mutter area in which one is allowed to carry on Shabbos. So that's the shita of Rabbi Yoshua, of Rav Huna Bereder Rabbi Yoshua in regards to Nizra Rubo, that what we're talking about is when inside this karpef that was hukaf ladira, inside the space for which you planted some low, some vegetation that covers up to a besa asayim, so that's already still permissible to carry. Ask the Gemara against the shita of Rav Huna Bred Rav Yoshua, the Reb Shimon Nami, but Reb Shimon would have a problem with this. What's the problem? Kevan de Nizra Rubo, since, as was stipulated here, you've planted more than 50% of the karpef, even though it's less than a besa asayim. But since you planted more than 50% of the karpef, so then, harei hahu miuta batil le legabe ruba, the minority of space which is not planted should be nullified against the space that is planted, and in that space that is planted, you should not be able to carry, and therefore it's as if the whole thing is low vegetation, is nizra rubo, and therefore says the Gemara, just based on general rules of Torah that we have majority, so therefore Reb Shimon should not allow Rav Huna Bred Rav Yoshua the case that you are discussing. Says the Gemara, and if that's true, and if in fact we imply the rules of majority rules, if in fact that's true, so then the whole thing is, it's as if it's all nizra, the whole thing is planted, and then it's as if there's nowhere to walk. And because that's true, so therefore Rav Huna Bred Rav Yeshua's answer does not work. His pshat nizra rubo doesn't make sense. There should be no scenario where when you've planted more than 50% of this karpef, that you should be allowed to carry. Because if you plant more than 50%, then the rule of majority rules kicks in. Therefore, says the Gemara, Chavdalam and Aleph, second line, Eloi itmar hachi itmar. Really, we need to have a different pshat in Rav Huna Bred Rav Yoshua, and it must, of course, mean that we're talking about a case where we planted less than the majority. Hamiuta shari. It's when you planted less than 50% of the karpef, because again, as mentioned, planting more than 50% of the karpef, we'd run into the problem of majority rule. So let's see version 2. Amar Rav Huna Bred Rav Yoshua lo amran elo de lo have besa asayim aval besa asayim aser. We say that provided that it's a minority, a miut, and up to a besa asayim, that's mutter, that's no problem. You can still use that karpef that's less than 50% planted, and less than a besa asayim, that miut is less than a besa asayim. So then in those cases, it's mutter to still use this karpef. However, about besa asayim aser, even if it's still a miut, even if it's still less than 50%, but the area, the surface area with which you planted was greater than a besa asayim, greater than 5,000 square amos. If you've crossed that threshold, so then it's aser kiman. Who's that shita like? Kirabanan. That's like the shita of the Rabbanan. The Gemara here doesn't bring the sheet of the Rabbanan. Rashi here highlights in Dibur Hamaskal Kirabanan, that's about an inch below where we are. Rashi says, "The pligi alei de Reb Shimon bepera kol gagos." This is something that we will see later on, where the Rabbanan argue against the sheet of Reb Shimon, but it's not quoted here. But it is nevertheless the sheet of the Rabbanan. Okay, so that's another shita. However, we have a machlokas now. Now Rav Huna Bred Rav Yeshua at least has a shita that works. It's a shita that makes sense. So what's his shita? As long as it's less than 50% planted, the karpef is less than 50% planted, and as long as the surface area of planting is less than 5,000 square amos, then it does not ruin the karpef, and you can still carry. However, Rav Yomi Amidifti Masni Lakula, he taught a more lenient approach to this nizra case, to this case of planting. What was his case? Still, Hamiuta Shari, he agrees that it has to be less than 50% planted. Says the Gemara, how do we understand this new version of Rav Huna Bred Rav Yoshua within the world of Rav Difti, of Rav Yirmi Amidifti? He says, Amar Rav Huna Bred Rav Yoshua, lo amran ella beis sa'asayim. The only time it's mutter is when you plant more than 5,000 square amos. However, when you plant up to a beis sa'asayim. Sorry, let me read that again. Rav Yirmi Amidifti Masni Lakula. He taught an even more lenient shita, which is as follows. Hamiuta shari, it has to be less than 50%. Amar Rav Huna Bred Rav Yoshua, lo amar ela beis sa'asayim. Aval yoser mi beis sa'asayim aser, keman kereb Shimon. So he teaches a lenient ruling as well, that it can be up to a beis sa'asayim, but not more. Keman, who is that like? He says that that's like the shita of Rav Shimon that we saw before, where you can piece together two different types of parts of the karpef, a piece that is used and a piece that is unused. The piece that is used is the less than 49%, less than 5,000 square amos. That's permissible, and you can piece it together with the the space that's able to walk in, and we treat it all as one unit, and we still treat it as hukaf ladira, and that would be the shita, the second version of Rav Huna Brei Rabbi Yeshua. Says the Gemara at the 2 dots, a quarter of the way down, a little bit less, 10 lines down on Chav Dalet and Aleph. Says the Gemara, not aruba. We spoke about nizra ruba. What about planting saplings? So there we said hareu kechatzer mutter, that if you plant trees inside of a karpef, it does not ruin a karpef that's hukaf ladira. If that karpef was in fact made as a place to live, right? It's an open field in the middle of the desert, some random place where nobody really lives, but you choose to live there. As long as it's hukaf ladira, as long as you build it to live in, it's mutter to use. What if you plant saplings? So our Mishnah says it's like a chatzar and it's mutter to carry. So it says the Gemara at the 2 dots here, 10 lines down, Chav Dalet and Aleph, Amar Rav Huna, Amar Rav Avimi, Husha Suyni Tablos. That's true. When do we say that planting saplings is considered sufficient? When do we say that it's considered sufficient and we allow the karpef to still function? Says the Gemara, that's only true when the trees are planted in neat rows. However, Rav Nachman Amar, Afal Pi she'eina suyin tablos, even if they're not planted in neat rows, it is still permissible to use that. It does not have to be neat, as long as there's space to walk. Nobody plants trees mamish right next to each other. That's not the way that forests are planted, even though they're in a total disarray. So it's that's a machlokas. We paskin l'kula like Rav Nachman, that even though the trees are planted in a disarray, afal pikein, it does not ruin the karpef, and therefore one is still allowed to carry, provided that the saplings were planted there. And there, in other words, the story that matches up with these two shitas. Let's see how the story plays out. Mar Yehuda, Ikla Lebe Rav Huna Bar Yehuda. So Rav Yehuda went to the home of Rav Huna Bar Yehuda. Chazinhu lahanhu delo avide tablos. He saw that there were those who planted their trees without making rows. And he saw that people were carrying, even though the trees were not planted in rows. Amar Le, he said to them, I don't understand. Lo savar lamar lahade avimi. You don't hold like the sheet of Avimi, that the only time that you can carry in a karpef with trees is when the trees were planted, when the saplings were planted in rows? Says the Gemara, no. Amar Le, Ana Rav Nachman severely. I hold like Rav Nachman that one is in fact allowed to still use a karpef that's hukaf ladira, even if it's planted with saplings, even when it's not an organized set of trees. You can just go in there and plant trees however you want. And that ends that mini sugya there, that one is allowed to rely on the fact that even though trees are not planted in rows, it still will not ruin a karpef that's hukaf ladira, and one is still allowed to carry. About a third of the way down. Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Shmuel. Karpef yoser mi beso saim shelo hukaf ladira, ketzad hu ose. Let's say that there's a space, and it's bigger than 5,000 square amos. It's a karpef. Nobody really lives there. But I want to start using it. I want to make it usable and make it a space that I can carry on Shabbos. How do I go about doing that? So it says the Gemara, ketzad hu ose. So practical. Poretz ba pirtza yoser me eser. You should break down 10 amos of the wall that's surrounding this karpef shelo hukaf ladira, this space that really nobody lives in. Remember, it's hukaf already. It already has a wall around it of some kind. It's just that nobody lives in this space. So in order to make it good again, you have to break down one of the wall. You have to disassemble part of the hekef, and then you have to rebuild it, and you have to do 10 amos. You have to make a pirza yoser me eser. Says the Gemara, v'godro ma midon al eser umuter. The way that you make a karpef shelo hukaf ladira into a karpef that's hukaf ladira is by breaking the hakafa, by breaking the wall and rebuilding it. A break of 10 amos or more and then rebuilding it. Perfect solution. Asks the Gemara a question, one that we have seen in a different frame in Maseches Shabbos. Says the Gemara, Bayalu, halfway down, Parat ama v'gader ama, uparat ama v'gadra, ad ve'ishlimu liyoser me'asara mahu. Let's say for argument's sake that the wall is made out of bricks. You take off a brick and you replace it. You take off the brick underneath it and you replace it. And you keep doing that until you have a breadth of 10 amos that has been taken off of that wall, but replaced one brick at a time. There was never at any one moment a 10 amma pirza. It was only piecemeal, one brick at a time. Now I did the 10 amos in earnest. I got it all done right. But it was never in one moment. So do we view this slow, one at a time breakdown of the wall while still replacing every brick that was removed, does that count? Or do you need to have the break of 10 amos wide to be at a singular moment in time? When I look at the wall, it could be a snapshot in time, and that 10 amos is there, and then I can rebuild it. Which one is it? So says the Gemara, we're going to draw back now on our memories because we've learned about this before. It says the Gemara, Omar Lay, he said back to them, we don't know who's talking here. So the Meforshim here point out, let me just find the Marimakom here. In some Marimakomos here, some of the Defusim Yeshanim of Shas, the letters Aleph, Lamed are not there. It's not Omar Lay, because it said Omar Lahu. We don't know who's talking to who. So if you took it out, the answer is Lav Hainu Ditnan. Didn't we already learn this in Maseches Shabbos? What did we learn? You might remember this from how we make a kli tahor. We say as follows: Kol kli bale batim shiurun kirimonim. If you have a bowl, the way that we make a bowl no longer susceptible to tuma is by having a hole in it the size of a rimon. Now, asks the Gemara on that case, Uvoy chizkiya nikev kamoti zayis v'sasmo v'chazer nikev kamoti zayis v'sasmo. Let's say that there's smaller sized holes than a rimon. It's olive sized holes, much smaller. Let's say that you have 15 olives that comprise the girth of a rimon. And over the course of time, you've had 15 of these little olive holes that comprise the girth of that rimon. But every time there was a small hole, you replaced it. Of course, similar to our case, which is one brick at a time and replaced, one hole in the container and replaced. Do we look at that in an accumulative fashion to say that even though there was no snapshot in time when everything was open, where the kli was totally open, even though that never occurred, would we consider that kli to be tahor? Let's see what the Gemara says. Says the Gemara, Mahu, what would rimon? All of the olives in aggregate would have led to a size of a hole, the size of in girth and width and diameter of a rimon. Mahu, what's the din? Now, on that case of the rimon, we made a tzushtel. We jumped to another sugya, which is also a sugya that we learned, I believe, in Maseches Shabbos. And here was the case. Amar le Rav Yochanan, Rebbe Shin Salanu, Rebbe taught us the din here. Sandal shenifsika achas me'azna v'tikna. Let's say that you have a shoe. Now, their shoes were made differently than ours. They had a strap on the right side of the foot and a strap on the left side of the foot, and you'd bring the two on top of the foot and tie them together. We have shoe laces, which are totally separate of what we're talking about here. Don't be confused. These are like actually the leather of the shoe itself, not just the lace. The shoe is totally open. You put your foot on the bed of the shoe, and you bring over the leather straps and tie them on. It's not a totally enclosed shoe like we're used to. So if the right side falls off and you fix it, and then, says the Gemara, then we say that it's tamei medras. The shoe is still susceptible to tuma. However, nifsika shniya v'tikna, that was the right leather part of the shoe. What about the left leather part of the shoe that comes to the top of the foot? There we say tahor mina medras. In a cumulative form, we lose the status of the shoe. Now, it also happens to be, says the Gemara, about tamei mago medras. That's a side din, a total side din, not related to what we're discussing tonight. But the status of tumas medras was ruined, even though you fixed the first lace, you fixed the first strap of the shoe. You fixed the first one. The Gemara is going to analyze this now. Amr Salah, what did we say about this din? Why is it that when the first one came off, we said that the shoe is still tamei? The reason why was because because we still had the second strap. The shoe is still viable to be used in one way or another. However, shniya nami hakaima rishona. When the second part of the shoe came off, well, that shouldn't have been a problem because we've replaced the first strap of the shoe. So says the Gemara, panim chadashos ba'u lekan. No, it's not correct. That when we have the second strap of the shoe falling off, when that happens, so now we're in a place where we have panim chadashos. Now the shoe is a new shoe. But you replaced the first strap. You're right, but it's accumulative. If that's true, says the Gemara, hachanami panim chadashos ba'ulakan. The same would be true by the small olive holes that you replaced with metal or with whatever. And we look there, we say accumulatively, that's no longer a tamei kli, it's tahor. Let's go back to our case. Accumulatively, and this is our real answer. Yes, you asked, can we remove the 10 amos of our case of a karpev shehu kaf ladira? Can we break that, a karpev shelohu kaf ladira? Can we break down those walls one brick at a time and replace them? such that in conclusion, we will have removed 10 amos worth of the wall in width. Would that work to change the status of that karpef from shalohu kafladira to hu kafladira and make a mutter to carry? Says the Gemara, absolutely, yes it would, based on all of the Mara Mekomos we just saw. Because we saw by the olive holes in the sides of a cleat that were replaced. We saw by the laces in regards to the Tumas Medras of a Zav. We saw there that the accumulative effect was powerful enough to change the status, even though we replaced each piece as they fell off. So the same is true here by our case with the bricks and by the karpef shalohu kafadira. And what do we see from here? We see therefore that the accumulative effect is such that if we had a karpef shalohu kafladira and we removed all of the bricks, it would then be permissible to carry in that space. Says the Gemara, we don't know who's talking, but says the Gemara about whoever said this svara. Kari alei, they said about this person, leistein bar inish. This person isn't the person, he's a Malach Hashem Tzivakos. Look at the lumdus, the tzushtel, the jumping from sugya to sugya, beautiful, not even complicated, but the comparisons were on the mark, and the Gemara says this person is not a person, they are an angel. A little bit of a lesser compliment, but a compliment no less. Some say, no, Ikeda Amre, Kigon Dain Barnash. This person is a remarkable person. Either way, it's kind of whatever the colloquialism was of the day to say that you are a remarkable person. And that was this person, whoever this anonymous Jew was, this anonymous Talmud Chacham was, to be able to make the comparison from our case of taking away the bricks one at a time to get to a width of 10 amos, so to by the olive size holes in the kli, so to by the case of the shoe of the Zav. Continues the Gemara. 3/4 of the way down, Chavdal and Maralef, Amar Rav Kahana, Rechava She'achorei Abatim. Let's say that there's a space behind your house. This Rechava is equivalent to a karfef. It's equivalent to a space that really isn't used that much. Some people don't use their backyards, but it would have to be like an open space that's never used. I did a bris recently for someone. Their backyard is effectively a golf course. So that might be a good example of a karfef because it's not hukaf ladira. Nobody lives there. Some people live there. Some people play a lot of golf. But be'etzem, nobody lives there. It's not even a place that's reasonable to live. So their backyard is not fenced in. So maybe if they never used their backyard, it would be considered a rechava. Let's just, for comparative sake, I'm not paskening anything. I never pasken anything. But let's just use that as a sample tonight. It's a backyard that's super open and not hukaf ladira. So it says the Gemara, if you have this part behind your house and it's open, in that space, you only have the minimum amount that you have on any particular Shabbos, which is that you cannot carry more than Dalet Amos. The Amar Rav Nachman, in Pasach lo Pesach, muter letaltel bekulo, Pesach matiro. If you open an opening from your house into that rechava, into that space behind your house, then it's muter to carry because the Pesach is matiro. The opening is the matir for that karpef. It's a matir that you should be able to carry in that space. Says the Gemara, Velo Amran, let's qualify this. When do we say that the door is a matir? When you open from your home, you cut out the drywall, you put in a door from the back of your house into this rechava, now it's mutter to carry there. Under what circumstances? So says the Gemara, Velo Amran, you first would need to have cut out the door and then to have put around the hekef, then to surround that area. However, aval, hukaf, if first you surrounded the area, which would effectively be hukaf shelo ladira, right? It's a shelo hukaf ladira at that point. And then ulavis sof pasach, and only after you were makif that area, you built a door from your house to that rechava, then that does not work. That doesn't work. Because when you put in the hakafa, when you put in the walls to that space, it was shelo hukaf ladira. Says the Gemara, thank you, Captain Obvious, says the Gemara, Pasach ulavisof hukaf. If you open the door and only afterwards, if you put a door into the back of your house and then afterwards you were hukaf, then you surrounded the area. So pshita, pasha that's hukaf ladira. Because the only time you were makif that area, was when you already had access to it from your house. So of course, that's a class. That's not a karfef anymore. That's mamish. That's a place where that's your backyard already. That's your backyard. It wouldn't be a karfef anymore. It wouldn't be a rechava, it'd be a chatzer. So that's so obvious. So says the Gemara, no. tzricha. Really, we needed this case. Tzricha, the East Bay Dari, because behind your house, there was a granary, says Rashi. That's a Dari. Mahu de Tema, 5 lines, 6 lines from the bottom. Mahu de Tema, we might have thought, Adaita de Dari Avde, that when you opened the door, even though you were makif the space after opening the door, but maybe when you opened the door, your intention was only for the Beit Dari, was only for the granary. And therefore, when you're makif afterwards, hava amina, that maybe because when you cut the door in the back of your house to get to the granary, it was only for the granary. And then when you're hukaf ladira, it's really still shelo ladira. Kamash Malan, says the Gemara, that even if your intention is only for the granary, but the fact that you were makif after you opened the door, even though you were focused on the granary, doesn't make a difference. It's considered hukaf ladira, and it would be permissible to carry. Let's talk about some of the what ifs. Karpev yoser mi besa asayim, 5 lines from the bottom. If you have a karpev, a space that's not typically used, that's larger than 5,000 square amos, it's hukaf ladira, and it's a place where you would be allowed to carry because it's hukaf ladira. And then it's just a total torrential rain, vinismale maim, and it fills up with water, it floods. So what's the din? Says the Gemara, savu rabban lememar kizraim damo ve'aser. The rabbis wanted to say that maybe this is similar to the case of planting your whole field, your whole karpef, with vegetation, and it should be usher, like we started with on the bottom of Chav Gimel Amud Beis today. So says the Gemara, Amar Lahu, Rav Abba, Avua de Rav, Berei de Rav Misharshia. No, I disagree with you. I would not say that if the karpef that was hukaf ladira, where it should be mutter to carry, that if it flooded, you would no longer be mutter to carry. What instead should I compare it to? Says the Gemara, Hachi Amrinan Mishmei de Rava. This is what we learned from Rava. Mayim kinetayim damo v'sharim. Mayim is like planting saplings, which, as we learned, is like a chatzar and mutter. So the flooding in the karpef, when it's hukaf ladira, where it should be mutter to carry, the saplings don't ruin it. Turning to the top of Chav Daled Amud Beis, Amar Amemar, when is this true? The only time that we would say that the flood is like the saplings and therefore mutter to still carry in that space is when it's chazion l'tashmishta. Rashi, what does it mean that the water is able to be used? Simple. L'shasiya, to drink. This is the best place to live. We're not acclimated to living in a place that's flooded, but for people who didn't have faucets, that might not have been the end of the world. You had an endless supply of water. Great. So that would be how the Gemara distinguishes here to say that it's mutter under certain circumstances to be in a karpef shehukaf ladira when there's water, and the provision is that the water has to be drinkable for you. The Rashba doesn't agree here. The Rashba says that this is not the parameter. He has a different definition of the chazin l'tashmishta. A good conversation for another time. Second line, Chav Daled Amud Beis. Amar Rav Ashi, u'dechazin l'tashmishta nami. Even when we say that it's chazin l'tashmishta, which, as Rashi pointed out, is that it's drinkable water. Lo amran ela she'ein be'omko yoser mibeis ha'asayim. The depth of the water cannot be in volume 10 tefach deep by a beis ha'asayim. Beis ha'asayim is 5,000 square amos. Remember we discussed yesterday, it's the square root of 5,000 is 70.7. So if you have a 70.7 amma by 70.7 amma by 10 deep, so then even according to the shita that we just learned on the bottom in the name of Rabbi, even according to that shita, that water doesn't ruin a karpef shehukaf ladira. If it's that deep and that wide and that long, then it would be problematic. So if it's hukaf ladira, karpef, floods, 10 tvachim deep, and 70.7 by 70.7 amma squared, so then you got a problem. It's 50,000. Oh, it's not 50,000. It's 5,000 square amos with a depth of 10, with a depth of 10 tvachim. So that's what the Gemara says that would not work, and the Gemara then rejects this. Says the Gemara, we said lo amran ela she'ein be'omko yoser mibeis ha'asayim about yesh be'omko yoser mibeis ha'asayim asur, that if it was 10 tefach deep by the square area of a beis ha'asayim, so then it would be asur. But the Gemara rejects it. V'lav milsehi, that's not true. Midi dehave akarya de peri. It would be no different than that area being laden with fruit. And where it was laden with fruit, we would not have said, even if it's 10 tefach deep, we would not have said that it's problematic. The same is true with water, and that is how the Gemara concludes. One more sugya for tonight, one that requires some visualizing, a little bit of abstract thinking, but not complicated, and says the Gemara as follows: 6, 7 lines down, Chaf Daled Amud Beis. This will bring us to the top of the Amud very shortly, and then we will stop for the night. Says the Gemara, Hahi Rechava Dehava Befum Nahara. There was a Rechava, an open space, a karpef that was Befum Nahara. Without Rashi, I would have said Befum Nahara means at the opening of a river. But Rashi actually says that was the name of the city. It was Pum Nahara. That was the name of the place. Now, this Rechava, to one side, had as follows. Says the Gemara, Dechad Gisa Hava Psiach Lemata. So if I am sitting here in the center and I have the Rechava in hand, there's a city off to my left. Good. That's what's happening on one side of the Rechava. And then says the Gemara, Dechad Gisa, on the other side, Psiach L'Shvil Shel Kramim, then it points to a vineyard. And on the other side of the vineyard, V'Shil Shel Kramim, have a Salik Leguda Denahara. And the vineyard basically goes to the edge of the water where there is a sharp slope. So within my window frame here, here's what we have. We have our Rechava. We have a city off to my left, your right. I think that's your right. And we have a vineyard that ends at the water. That's our case that we have right here. That's what the Gemara says. So city, Rechava, vineyard, water. Okay, let's continue. Says the Gemara, in such a case, that's our case. Amar Abaye, Heichi Na'avid. How could we make it that it's permissible to carry in this Rechava, city on one side, Kramim on the other? How do we work that out? Says the Gemara, if you want to say Le'avid Lamechitza Aguda Nahara, if you want to go all the way over here and say, why don't we just put up a wall by the water? There's no point in putting up a wall by the water. Ein osin mechitza al gabe mechitza. We already have one. This is tel hamislaket, the din that we learn, that when the slope drops by 10 tfachim over a distance of 4 amos, that's considered a wall mamish. You're going to build another wall? There's already a wall there. We don't need you to build another wall. We already have one. So that can't be it. So then says the Gemara halfway down Chaf Daled Amud Beis, fine. Why don't we put up a tzuras HaPesach by the Shvil Shel Kramim, by the entrance to the vineyard, and that will serve as a reminder for us that would then allow us to carry in the Rechava. Says the Gemara, that won't work because asu gamle shajanle, because we're concerned that when a gamal will walk through there, they're very tall animals, that they're going to break the tzuras HaPesach. That doesn't work either. So then the Gemara gives a third recommendation. Right between the Rechava in the middle. So we have city, and we have Rechava, and we have Kramim, and we have the water. So let's see what Abaye's third recommendation is. We should put a lechi here between the Kramim and the Rechava, between the Kramim and the Karfev. That should work, says Abaye. And demigu de mahanya l'shvil shel Kramim, and just like it would work to allow someone to carry by the vineyards, mahani nami l'Rechava. It should also work for carrying in the Karfev. Good answer, says the Gemara. It should work. Says the Gemara, can't be. No. Amar le Rava. Rava rejects Abaye's answer. Imkain, if that's true, people will make the mistake of assuming, Yomru, they'll say, lechi mo l'shvil shel Kramim de alma. They'll think that in general, that a lechi alone will help Kramim, and that's not true. You need more than just one lechi to be matir Kramim. You need more walls. It's insufficient. One lechi doesn't work. Someone looking at this scenario might assume that the one lechi that you put between my Rechava and the Kramim, this is your lechi right here, you might have assumed that one lechi is sufficient to be matir carrying in the Kramim. That's for sure not true, says Rava. So therefore, says Rava, another answer. Amar Rava, and this is the one we end up accepting. How is it? Again, let's go back to our case. You have the city, you have the Karpev, and you have the Kramim and the water. How do we matir carrying in the Rechava? So says the Gemara as follows. Amar Rava, Avdinan le pischa lechi, Avdinan le lechi le pischa de mata. City, Rechava. Put the lechi in between the city and the Karpev. That's what the Gemara recommends in the name of Rabba. Why would that work? Mahani, says the Gemara, demigu de mahani le lechi lemata, just like a lechi would work for a city. We use lechis and koras all the time in Chicago. So then, mahani nami l'rechava, it should also work for the Karpev. It should also work for that space. There's already an opening. We don't need to do the damage that we did earlier, which is break down a wall of 10. We already have that. It's open. So how do we make this rechava mutter, says the Gemara? It's by putting up a lechi between the mata, between the city, and between the rechava hilkach. Therefore, 3 lines from the bottom, till tule b'mata gufa shari. because of that lechi, one is allowed to carry even in the city. You could also carry in the karpef at that point because it's considered hukaf ladira. The lechi changed over the status of lo hukaf ladira to hukaf ladira, a very powerful lechi. What about carrying from in the city into the rechava and from the rechava back into? Can you go back and forth into these two reshuyos? Now the lechi was matir both of them. One lechi was matir both of them. Maybe we should be able to carry interchangeably between the two. That's a machlokas. Pligi baravacha beravina. Bottom line, chaptal and base. Says the Gemara, that's a machlokas between Rav Acha and Ravina. Chad asar v'chad shari. One said that it's forbidden and one said that it's permissible. We paskin ladina in such a case that it would be permissible to carry from one to the next. Turning to the top of Chav Amud Aleph, just to learn two lines of lamdus behind these two shitas in the Amoraim. And with this, we will wrap up tonight. Says the Gemara, man shari, the one who allows for carrying to haleka diurin, because there's nobody living there. Nobody living where? Well, there are so many spaces we're talking about. It can't be talking about the mata. People live in the city. What is it talking about? Take a look at Tosfos. Tosfos tibur hamaschel man deshari dehaleis pe diurin ubishvil shel kramim. It's referring to the kramim. Ubishvil nami leis pe diurin delitzeru ale. See, we were concerned that had there been people who lived in the kramim, who lived in the fields by the vineyards, that they would think that it's mutter to move from there into the rechava. But if no one lives in the shvil, in the shvil shel kramim, says Tosfos, then there's no concern about carrying from the rechava into the mata. However, uman de asar, top line, moving to the second line, uman de asar, the one who says that it's forbidden to carry from the rechava to the mata and from the mata to the rechava, from this karpef to the city and back, what's their concern? Zim, and dahava b'diurin, ba'asila tiltile. We are afraid that sometime those locations will be populated with people. They'll make the mistake and they'll carry from the shvil shel kramim into the rechava, and that's also. So sikum advarim, we spent some time learning tonight about a karpef. We know that a karpef shelohu kafadira cannot be carried in midrabanan. The way to fix it is by breaking down a wall, even if it's brick by brick, no problem. If you have a karpef that's hukafadira and you plant small seeds, it could ruin it. If you plant trees, it would not ruin it. If it floods, it usually doesn't ruin it unless it's 10 tefach deep. And then our last conversation for tonight was about how we solve the problem of a rechava between a city and between a vineyard. And we answered by putting a lechi between the city and the karpef. And that would be our solution for this evening. And we are going to stop here. Tonight's Wednesday, so tomorrow night is going to be another blot and a half. So tomorrow night we'll learn Daf Chav Hey and Emir Tashem Chav Vav Amud Aleph. And then we'll be back in person Emir Tashem on Shabbos. So tomorrow night also going to be on Zoom. And then on Shabbos we'll be back in person for Chav Vav Amud Beis and for Chav Zayin. Wishing you all a beautiful night.